49. Wow, that's it's still going up. So, well, we'll go ahead and get started here because we've got a good number of folks here. We're going to go through some hacking here, and I'm sure there's going to be questions. I'll be watching the chat as I go and hopefully not get too distracted by it. But want to make sure that we take a moment here at the beginning to acknowledge something, okay? We've all been hacked. Everyone has. I myself have. All the best cybersecurity experts have. No one can claim to never be hacked. However, how many of us actually know how we've been hacked? Now, getting to know the why is going to, or getting to know the how and the why is going to what allows us to get to how to prevent it. And so, in order to prevent a hack, we need to start thinking like a hacker. And so unfortunately my FaceTime video is doing this backwards here, but if you can read backwards really quickly, I like to do this with a theme that's near and dear to a lot of our hearts. And so for now and for the rest of this, we're going to take the position of being part of the empire and start to look at what was going on in the empire. So imagine you have a website that you have built that your goal is that someday it's just going to conquer the galaxy. Initial launch was a great success. It did exactly what you wanted it to do. However, there's some bad actors out there, and they are plotting to take this entire thing down offline. Now, with one small hole in your defenses, the entire thing can be destroyed, right? Everything that you've worked for is gone. Now, luckily, and if you've watched the movies, you know that Drupal's defenses are updated, and we're in a better position, and we can now, blow up multiple planets at the same time. However, the rebels are smart, but their ways are consistent. And so through holes in the plot and through patterns in their attacks, we can learn about how folks are getting hacked and what it means. So for this, if everyone can head to internal.deathstarsecurity.com, there's going to be, unfortunately, normally when I'm doing this in front of a crowd, we're going to have a live hacking. And the most nervous part for me is that there is live demos that I'm actually pulling up my browser and doing that with. But with this, we're not going to be doing that. No, it's not a URL trap. You guys are all safe to go there for now. But what we're going to look at with that site are some really, really, really poorly written modules, but we're going to look at why they were poorly written and what the effect of those are. So while everyone's heading there, I'll introduce myself really quick. My name's Chris Teitzel. I'm the founder of Locker and Seller Door. I've been fortunate enough to work with startups of all sizes, or startups all the way up to Fortune 100 companies. I've been working in open source for over a decade, Drupal since 2009. Lifetime hacker, and then recently was appointed to the Department of Homeland Security's Data Privacy and Integrity Advisory Committee. It's a mouthful, but working with the department on privacy issues and helping to figure out ways that the Department of Homeland Security can protect the privacy of not only their employees, but also the public as well. So what we're going to look at here is a few modules that were written by this Death Star Security. And so the first one is called Stormtrooper Customer Targeting. And what Stormtrooper Customer Targeting is going to do is it's going to allow you to never miss a customer, because we're going to track them all. We're going to put IDs on everything, and we're going to be able to watch them go through the site. So how exactly does this module miss the mark? Well, we've got a demo here. And so if you go to the login page right now, you will likely see that there's some shaking going on. And if you have your sound up, you're going to be hearing some familiar tunes playing. But this is a fun script to show what is a cross-site scripting. And so cross-site scripting is what you can't hear me now? Are we having some audio problems? Okay, good. Somebody posted in the chat that they can hear me there. So awesome. So if you notice that, that was an example. Oh, the music. Yeah, you're not going to be able to hear the music because it's not playing through the audio here. So if you look at what's going on here, this is the code that's running in the background, and we trusted our users. That was what went wrong. In doing so, we said, hey, whatever is in the tracking ID in the GET request, just put that into a variable. And then when we go to our template, we're just going to take that variable and put it into a hidden input. So that way, when they submit that form, we'll be able to track them and see what's going on. But inherent trust in user input is dangerous, and it's what leads to cross-site scripting. And so cross-site scripting, if you don't know, is when somebody is given the ability to allow arbitrary or remote JavaScript to run in your browser. And in this case, it's a remote JavaScript that I've hosted somewhere else, that by implanting that link in the right way, in the get string properly, I'm able to inject my JavaScript, and right now it's just probably playing some music and making your screen go crazy on you. However, if you're doing it nefariously on something like a logout or a login form like that, I can do key logging and grab your passwords. I can do a whole bunch of stuff that's just completely nefarious, but I can control your browser. I can control everything that goes on in the browser, all the JavaScript, all the HTML, anything you see, anything you do. I'm in complete control of it. So, of course, I can exfiltrate data. I can keylog. I can look at cookies. If you're setting your cookies wrong or you're not using secure cookies, then I can look at the data inside of those cookies all through that JavaScript. And it can get really nefarious really quickly. And this is actually one of the more common security patches that you'll see on Drupal.org. And so when folks are looking at or Drupal.org/security, and they're going through all the security releases, you're going to see cross-site scripting as being a number one or one of the top attacks that are going on there, or patches that have to be put in. And so that's because folks don't sanitize the user input. And when we say sanitize the user input, we're saying when somebody is giving you input, whether that's you're pulling it out of a get string or you're getting it from a post request on a form, you're not sanitizing that input. You're not running it through some filters to make sure there's nothing nefarious in there. And we're doing it because we trust people. We inherently trust people. And that's the number one thing you should learn, if anything from here, is just don't trust anyone. Don't trust the websites you go to. Don't trust the folks that are going to your website. Because even if they're an admin, even if they have certain privileges, you don't know if the person who's submitting that form or who's going to that page is actually an admin. And so what can we do to prevent cross-site scripting like this? We can use some great functions that Drupal has in its core for filtering, and then also filter admin. Filter admin allows you to do a little bit more HTML than a regular filter will. So it'll let more HTML through that filter, but it'll scrub it so that when it gets out to the Twig layer and into the template layer and eventually to the front end, you'll eventually sanitize all that, and it'll look like a bunch of garbled junk, but it actually won't run in the browser because it's not executable code. The other thing is, don't use or use the form API. Wherever you're at, use the form API, because the form API provides cross-site scripting cleanup on output by default. Not every CMS does this, and one of the things that I love about Drupal is our intricate form API allows us to do all sorts of fun things, but it's very, very safe. It has non-sync to prevent cross-site request forgeries, which we won't be getting into in this session, but we can talk about those later. But the form API is very, very secure, and it's also very powerful. So if you ever want to create a form, don't try doing it on your own. Use form API. And then, as someone has pointed out already, don't ever use the raw filter in Twig. Twig, and one of the reasons why we as a project moved to Twig, is that it's much more secure than just raw PHP templates. And so it doesn't let you, you have to, well, let's put it this way, you have to force yourself into a situation where you're outputting unsanitized text. And that's because Twig will auto escape all the strings for you. So even if you are mistakenly putting it somewhere or saving it, or somebody is able to get it in, if it's running through Twig, Twig will escape it for you. So unless you put that raw filter on there, and someone pointed out earlier, yes, that was using the raw filter in Twig. Now, what's also interesting about that hack in particular is the reason why I'm able to get all of you to go to that, and you're all now will have the Harlem Shake in your head for the rest of the day, is because of what's called stored cross-site scripting. And so stored cross-site scripting, and this was actually kind of a fun thing I learned in setting up this demo, is that user login form is cached. So it's not actually getting stored in the database, which is a common form of stored cross-site scripting, where I can inject something into a customer form in e-commerce or something like that, and then I can get the admins to click on something that has cross-site scripting. No, what I did here was I actually went to the site with that, injected my payload into the get string, let it all go through, hacked myself, but in doing so, it cached my hack, my cross-site scripting. And by caching that, that's how I can then store it in their caches and release it upon everybody else. And so you have to be very careful that it's not just what's called reflective, or I'm just going to inject it in with a bad URL. It can also be stored not just in your database, but also in your caching layer. So make sure that you're really sanitizing that output that's going to the front end in order to make sure that you don't inadvertently affect folks. So next, we're going to look at a module called Droid Scanner, and this is going to be pretty fun. It simulates something that I've run into in the real world, but it's really just kind of bad code. And you would never write this code, but you'll see what the simulation is. But the idea here is that we have a form on the site, which is the search form. There, if you're on the site now, you'll see the search form that lets you search through the nodes there. And that search form goes off and does some various things. And so what you have to ask yourself is, what harm can a few droids really do? Well, in reality, what we're not dealing with on the web is just a few droids or a few bots. What we're dealing with is an army of bots and an army of everything that's going to and we're dealing with armies and armies and armies, layers upon layers upon layers of DDoS attacks. And so if you notice here in the demo, I'm going to go up and I'm going to do a search for my favorite droid, R2D2, and I'll hit search, and then it's going to take a while, right? It's going to take 5 or 6 seconds, which is just bad performance in general, but it's going to take a little bit to do that. Now, if you look at the code behind that, all I'm doing is I'm injecting just sleep for 5 seconds in the PHP. That's just not anything somebody would realistically do. However, if I can find a slow function on your site, I can do what's called a DDoS attack, and that's a distributed denial of service. And so a distributed denial of service, or a DDoS attack, you'll start hearing of these, and they go around quite often. It used to be something that you could get a couple thousand folks who have malware on their computers to wake up in the middle of the night and you're going to go crash a website. And so hacking doesn't necessarily have to be defacing a website or taking data out of it. If I can take your website offline, I can cause just as much mischief or just as much harm as anything else. And so DDoS attacks are starting to get more and more prolific, and they're also starting to get larger because, frankly, we have more things online. One of the things that is kind of a latent concern in the cybersecurity community is IoT and the broad distribution of these online and connected devices, from watches to refrigerators to toasters, microwaves, whatever they may be. If they're all online, they're all capable of being hacked, and then they're capable of being turned into a point where we're just going to go in and request and request and request that slow function. Now, why would we have a slow function like that? Well, sometimes it's just submitting a form. And if we submit a form over and over and over and over again, we're going to flood the website, we're going to take down the processing power, and eventually just take it offline and crash the servers. But more often than not, what we're going to see is that slow functions that you're going to want to do when I submit a form will end up slowing down the site enough of us that enough of us hitting that form will take it offline, or hitting that function will take it offline. Somebody's asking right now, there's 300 of us, should we flood it? go for it. We're on Pantheon, and they are more than able to handle that type of load. But if we look at this function here, and we're looking at why somebody would have a slow function, I think back to a project that I did where I ran a website that was an e-commerce website for African airline ticket sales. And so when somebody would go into the website, they would search, and that search would have to go to a reservation system and grab the requested date and time and all the flights and come back. And then it would have to go back and forth and all these things. And it was a very, very slow process. And what was the slowest process of all was once I submitted my payment, normally you want to be able to say, okay, I want to reserve that seat right now because I don't want anyone else getting that seat. However, that process took seconds upon seconds to do. And if we had thousands of people concurrently doing that, all going through those processes, we would just tank all of our servers. And so one of the things that I recommend to folks is take those slow functions that you may have, whether it be in e-commerce or it be any type of checking, even if it's log checking, to look for cybersecurity attacks, move those to asynchronous processes and asynchronous queues that can then be run. What we did on that side is we just ran a cron every 5 minutes and ran through that and cleared out the queue. And so by doing that, by moving things asynchronously to the user, they're not able to trigger anything that is going to slow the site down. Because if one person can hit it and slow the site down, 1,000 people, 100,000 people, 1 million, 100 million bots, they can all do that. So that's the DDoS attack. And when we're looking at that, we're looking at terabytes upon terabytes a second being poured into some of these nodes and into some of these websites, and no server can handle that. And so this is why you use a CDN as well, because a CDN will distribute all of your site files and everything across the world. So if a DDoS is coming out of, say it's coming out of Europe or South America or the US or Southeast Asia, it's going to take down the most local node to wherever that's at, but it's not going to take down the rest of the site for all your users. Last, we're going to look at something called exhaust port SEO. This is a module that is going to allow us to really look and dive into the SEO of our website and make sure that our articles are lining up with where they should be. And of course, make our site explode with traffic. And so when we look at this, if you're on the site right now, this is what you're seeing right now. You can scroll through, you can see some of the various articles that have been published there and have fun with those. However, if you know the right URL and you type in the right URL, you can get to a different list. And if you notice what the URL is, it's admin content exhaust port SEO. And that looks like the same list of articles that we were running for that admin user. However, all the way down at the bottom, you'll see that we have a new post. And that new post, unfortunately, is that Death Star Security is going out of business because, frankly, we can't make good modules. So what's going on there? Well, access bypass, in addition to cross-site scripting, is one of the more common ones, one of the more common issues that are seen in not only the Drupal ecosystem, but then also broader across the web. And so if I'm creating these lists and these admin pathways, I can still set the permissions wrong on them to say, hey, if you can access content, you can go to this page. Well, your first reaction is going to be, well, no one's going to put access content in there, right? The access bypass issues that we see are actually a bit more layered than that. So if I'm going to a page that just prints out all the titles of every, yes, it was copy and paste demo code for sure. But if you're looking at what's going on inside that function, inside that function is going to be, we're pulling all the titles and we're going to display them out to the screen. Now, that by itself, it could be a very useful thing, especially if I'm doing SEO and I'm wanting to check through those. But what I'm not checking is the user able to see the nodes that I'm going to show them? They may have my permission to see that page, but they may not have the permission to see the nodes that they're supposed to. So these access bypass a lot of the times means that I'm going to go to a page and I'm going to see something, or I have the ability to see something that I shouldn't be able to see because of permissions that are elsewhere in the system. And so, again, good clean code, making sure you have your permissions in order is going to really, really help that. Now, a lot of the times you can look at that and say, what's the big deal, right? How bad is it going to be if somebody sees a couple of taxonomy terms they shouldn't, right? Well, it can get really bad really quickly. And so this is a great story, and one that I use for this type of attack very often, is that there was an international hacking network that would go into some of the largest press release databases and look at their unpublished press releases that were queued up, ready to go, but not yet published to the open web. And so what they would do is they would look at those press releases and could see, oh, this company just missed their earnings by 15%, or this company blew away all of the analysts, and they're going to be skyrocketing tomorrow. Well, they went and front ran the market and were able to just print money out of the stock market to the tune of over $100 million. As some hackers do, they were drinking in a Russian bar. They started bragging about it, and one thing leads to another. They're arrested and convicted of hacking. And it was a large scheme around this. But it all goes back to, if I can access data that I shouldn't, whether that be I have access to somebody's login, or I have access to a lower level environment that I all of a sudden escalate, those privilege escalations or those access bypasses can let me get to some pretty damaging data. So Drupal core has a great permissions and data access framework. Use it. There's a great API doc out there for how to use it. Obviously, with Drupal 9, you want to go to that one and start coding against that. But what you're going to want to look at is, if you're creating permissions and you're creating your own custom permissions, that's great, but make sure you're checking everything about that page or that data to make sure that that person can actually access what you want them to access, and they can actually see everything that's on the page. Sometimes you don't even need to write your own custom permissions. You can use core ones, right? A perfect example is the one that we were just looking at. If I just went to that and said, rather than access content, if I put it to administer content, then anyone who could administer content is going to go back and say, well, if I can administer content, I can create, I can delete, I can edit. So then all of a sudden, I can go look at the titles. That's a great way to say, well, if they have this permission and all of that is already underneath this, then we're going to allow them to do this. So you don't always have to create your own custom permissions, and you can use the core ones as well. So this seems overwhelming. I know it can feel overwhelming. These are some basic attacks that we've looked at in terms of cross-site scripting, DDoS attacks, and privilege escalation or access bypass. But the question I always get is, well, now what, right? How do I prevent myself from writing this bad code? Obviously, you're not going to go write a function that sleeps for 5 seconds and then comes back. You're not going to go just say access content on every admin pathway that you create. So for the longest time, I will admit, I completely thought that anything that came out of Microsoft was doomed and it shouldn't be used. I have completely reversed my ways, and VS Code is what did that for me. And so using VS Code, and I know we're probably in the chat here going to get into PHP Storm versus VS Code versus TextEdit or Vim, whatever you want to write in, that's great. But for me, as I code, I find that using VS Code and configuring it to use PHP Code Sniffer will help me visualize a lot of the insecure code. I can see what's going on, and it will warn me if you don't know what you're doing. It will warn me that, hey, what you just did, you're not sanitizing that data, or here's an error that could occur. And even sometimes smaller errors can boil up into larger hacks. And so a lot of the times, if you're beginning, or I've been coding for 10 years, and that doesn't say much because I still write bad code, I use this daily, and I'm constantly getting caught by errors that I'm making. And in a WordPress version of this, I actually published all the module or all the plugins out to a public repo for folks to then add and contribute back to. And I can already see that, that my coding isn't that good. So I need to continually use this no matter how good I think I am. So with that, we're sitting at about 1:40 here. I wanted to leave us a bit of time to go through questions because I normally get quite a bit of questions at the end. And so with that, we're gonna hop into some questions here. If you have a question in the chat, you could start it with a Q. I've seen folks doing that. It really helps kind of move that out of the chatter. I'll try to scroll through here and see if there are any other questions that are coming up here. Yeah, I will share a link to my slides. I know we kind of breeze through things really fast, but I will be sharing a link to my slides here. Normally I get done with this and then I'll post them up, convert them, and do all that. So yes, I will be posting that out. If you follow me on Twitter, I'll put it out there, and then I'll try and see if there's a way through Hopin or any of those to be able to share it with folks as well. So one of the other things while folks may be typing or asking their questions here, if you notice, some of you were running various ad blockers. I was just talking with Drew Gorton just before this, and he was running a browser plugin that stops all scripts from happening on a website unless you give it direct permission. And so when I said, hey, go check this out, he goes, I don't see anything on that login form, right? Well, that's because he was blocking it. And so I will say, in creating these demos, I had to write purposely really bad code because Drupal actually at its core is fairly hard to do things wrong now. It's getting more and more, I like to say it's putting the bumpers on the bowling lanes for a lot of us, because what it does is it will automatically, escape all the text through Twig. It's going to pass form everything that's in your form array through cross-site scripting filters. It's going to do a lot of those checks that allow you to build code without being so scared that every line you're going to write is going to be hacked. And so, yeah, it actually took me quite a while to do that. And the other thing is that the browser community and the browsers are starting to step up their game as well. And so cross-site request forgeries, yeah, content security policy, HTTP header is a great way to do that, Dries. That's a great point. There are more and more ways that the security team and the core team are layering on, and Dries is using it himself. But there are more and more ways that the security team and the core team are just adding in feature after feature and function after function, API after API that really does this. Does make it a secure ecosystem to work in. And like I said, creating these demos is it was tough. And so the thing that makes me feel good is the tougher it is for me to build these demos means that the tools we're building are good. Amber mentioned that Sam Mortensen emphasized the need for manual code review in finding bugs that can be exploited. Code sniffing tools are great, but so is manual code review. 100%. VS Code and PHP Code Sniffer and the like will never replace manual code review. And Sam's been able to find some very intriguing and deep bugs that a lot of the code sniffing tools wouldn't get. So the question from Daniel is, in the page that had weak permissions, could the controller still check user access to entities? Yes, it could. Again, I was writing purposely really bad code because I know everyone here would write, flawless code that's absolutely perfect and never has any bugs or issues in it. However, for those of us that aren't, 10x coders, these things happen all the time. And so being able to look at what is some of those bad code, what I was doing in that controller was, all I was doing was saying, hey, query me all the titles or query me all the nodes, run through all the nodes and grab their titles and put them into just put them into a list and output it. It was incredibly basic and not something you would normally do, but it shows that if I run a query in one place, I may forget what that query was running or what permissions are there, and I'm not checking it below. And so being able to know and see what's in your code, that's not something a code sniffer is going to do, but that's something a manual review will. See some other questions here. I sometimes have to use unsafe inline or eval. To what extent does that become redundant? Yeah, I mean, there are times when you have to, the code sniffers or the bumpers may be too restrictive, but every time you break yourself out of that, you're opening yourself up for issues. So I would just say be very careful whenever you're going against anything that's trying to keep you in line. Let's see here. Any other questions? Yeah, if you haven't yet, definitely go and check out the other sessions that were run by folks in the security team. There is a wealth of knowledge around this project that are keeping us safe. And so, and one of the things that folks may not know about Drupal in particular, if you're new to the project, is that every module is covered under, every module that has a full published version is covered underneath the security team. And so they're constantly looking through. It's not just up to the developers. Some ecosystems, it's kind of the Wild West. And if somebody gets a hold of something, then they can put it into official repos and distribute it. The Drupal security team is constantly going through and looking through that, which makes it, in my opinion, one of the more secure ways of building a website now. Delphine, I'm probably pronouncing your name wrong, but it says it's not clear for me. Do not use raw. I want to print body content, and I can use either content body or node and dive through the array and use raw. Why it's not the best solution to use the second line of code. Anytime you're using raw in Twig, you're just saying, I've already done what I needed to do for this. And you're, again, trusting the upstream. And the number one rule in writing secure code is don't trust what's upstream of you. Just because you may be getting it out of the database doesn't mean that it was sanitized before it got in there. You just don't know. And so using raw just opens you up to being able to have somebody find a way to inject that malicious code upstream and then bring it down to your to the front end. What methods would you use to handle database injections properly? So the database abstraction that is in core now, there the database API is great. It does a lot of that sanitizing for you. Use that. Do not run your own queries. I have seen, luckily, in a long time ago, but I was watching folks actually pull the settings out of the settings PHP in their template files and running raw database queries, which is just mind-blowing of why you would need to do that. And it's yet another example of Drupal's core APIs giving you the ability to sanitize those database queries before they go in and not allowing you to inadvertently pass in those or making it more and more difficult to inadvertently pass those in. Coming down here. Yeah, Drupal 9 is using a more updated version of Twig. Good point, Rick. And so the raw tag is deprecated in favor of verbatim. And so, yeah, if you're as the technologies are starting to mature, we're starting to see more and more protections in there. All right. So if anyone's got any other questions, go ahead and post them in here. I'll hang out here for a bit. I'll be around, and hopefully folks that are new to the Drupal project will not be scared by this and scared of coding, but know that through a lot of the core APIs, you're protected against some of these more basic attacks. Dan has a question here. Returning build array end up going through form APIs? Yes, it should go through anything that's extending form base. You should be able to extend that as well. Thanks for coming, Dries. It's always crazy whenever you see, it's different than looking out at a room. I'm just looking at a screen, but there was at one point up to about 300 people in here, which is just fun to see. It's such a broad community come together. So thank you, and thank you to the organizers, and thank you to everyone at DrupalCon Global for putting this on and truly making this a global presentation and a global experience for everyone. So I encourage you all to continue to get involved, continue to be involved in the community, and come find us, come find me at some point whenever we're all back in person. I'd love to meet you all. Josh, you're more than welcome to try to hack me if you want. And so, yeah, I will be posting. I will be posting these slides online for folks. And so, if you want to take a look at them deeper, if you want to play around with some of the puns and the Star Wars stuff in there, if I somehow messed up canon or offended anyone who's a hardcore Star Wars nerd, that's what Twitter's for. Go ahead and leave it there. No, we're not going to talk about the prequels. Sorry. Oh, Dan, so your question about if Formbase offers the core protections, is a controller extending it, also getting that, or is it bypassing? Yeah, I'll have to go back and double check that, but I believe the sanitization happens in after your controller runs, so you should be good. But I'm more than welcome to be wrong on that one. But yeah, you should be able to. That being said, don't assume anything you see in that form array is secure or sanitized, and make sure that you sanitize anything in your controller as well. But I believe that anything that extends Formbase is still going to go through the filtering after you deal with it. Alessandro, I will say, now that we're kind of in the trailing minutes here, my wife is a Trekkie. I grew up on Star Wars and never was a Trekkie. No offense to any Trekkies out there. And we had a really, really hard time trying to figure out if our kids would be Star Wars fans or Star Trek fans. And needless to say, they've got a ton of lightsabers and all sorts of Star Wars toys. So, yes, we can be both. And I don't want to start a giant flame war on which is better, Star Trek or Star Wars. And yes, Star Wars was created purely as a marketing tool. But yes, a marriage between a Trekkie and a Star Wars fan can occur, and it can be fruitful. But there's nothing cuter than watching your kid dress up as a stormtrooper for Halloween, and everyone he sees say, "Move along." So that was pretty fun to watch. Delphine, yes, I will be sharing the link to the presentation, or the link to the slides later. I'll also, I don't know if I'll have a hard, like a deep link or a permalink to the session video itself. but I'll see if I can get that from Hopin and put that in there as well. All right, we've got about 5 more minutes to hang out in here. If folks want to hang out, ask any more questions, by all means. Yeah, I appreciate everyone coming, and thank you for the kind words. I feel like I should have some Star Wars music playing in the background right now, some Cantina music or something. Most interesting cybersecurity event from the last decade. Good question, Casey. Man, there's been some really odd ones. I personally like the hackers that got into unpublished data. I think that is it's not as interesting as it could be, I guess, or as other like large scale DDoS attacks or some of those, but definitely the wherewithal to get into a system, know how to pull those out, and then use it to front run the market is a pretty ingenious way of getting in and doing that. I do have to say one of my favorite hacks of all time, though, is Max Headroom, but that's outside of the last decade. But it's definitely fun to watch some of those. So if yeah, the Max Headroom hack was very fun. The old phone phreaking days and being able to get into systems just by using your phone. Those were, I mean, the ingeniousness of all that. And one of the other fun things, a story that I just saw that came across the wires was our friend and everyone's friend who had MySpace, Tom, was actually a hacker in high school who hacked a bank and got into their central database that held everything about all of their all the accounts, all the amounts, everything. It was the central database, and he was able to get in through kind of war driving through through the phone lines, and so the FBI put up this giant net and went to San Diego and did one of the largest coordinated arrests in California history, and they stormed the doors of about 20 people and found that it was a high schooler who was about 14 years old and all of his friends who he'd shown how to get into a banking database. And so he was let off without actually being charged and was on probation, and then went on to create the true one and only MySpace.com. So there are a lot of folks nowadays that had some interesting pasts of their own. And yes, for anyone who is who's still here, I forgot to mention it. Thanks, Eric, for mentioning that. There is a SurveyMonkey evaluation for this session that's linked at the top of the chat there. Be sure to hop in there and leave some reviews. I love looking through those at the end, or the data that I do get back. I don't know what we'll get back here, but I love looking through that data and seeing how to make these talks better. So definitely please go there and leave some reviews there. Tom is the only MySpace friend that anybody misses. Yeah, black hat does equal federal indictment, and it is nothing to mess around with. Don't take anything that I've said to stand up or promote black hat hacking by any means. It was interesting though that even at 14, he didn't get a federal indictment. He got off. So, but yeah, black hat hacking is nothing to mess around with. Now, white hat hacking and our own company, we have. Okay, well, Dave, I definitely I need to find you at the next conference, and we'll have some beers and talk about that. But one of the interesting things when we talk about hacking and black hat and white hat. Black hat is obviously malicious hacking and nefarious hacking. White hat hacking is something that actually companies will hire hackers to come in and try to do some of these hacks that we've seen here. And so white hat hacking is a great way for folks that have this knowledge and have the ability to hack to actually do it for good and do it for companies when they want it to occur. Bug bounties are a great way of that as well. We can get into some of the more details of that as we go, but bug bounties are another great way for folks to be able to solicit feedback and solicit bugs from the community that may end up being, a substantial security issue. So we'll see exactly how the Twitter hack comes out, but where that fell, and if that could have been caught by a bounty program. Do I know if the bounty program for Drupal might come back? I don't know. I wish it would. I wish we would have bounty programs for all technologies. Personally, they're a great way to incentivize folks to find issues and report them and report them in a organized manner. I've seen some communities have folks that are going out there under the title of security researcher, and then they go out and hack a bunch of plugins or modules or whatever, and then just post the exploits to the web. And that's never good. So responsible disclosure to the owner of the module or plugin is definitely necessary. So Eric, I think you're one of the session monitors. I don't know how long this goes on. I'm more than happy to stay here and chat and hang out and answer questions from folks who are here. But I know that we're kind of time, and if this was a physical room, I'd likely be getting shooed off and told to go to the hallway. So, but I'm more than happy to stay here and answer questions and talk to folks that need or want to. Do bug bounties really work with open source? Sure, I think they do. I mean, the heart of open source would be if you find that bug, you disclose it and responsibly and go through the core teams to fix it. However, bug bounties are for some security researchers a way that they provide for themselves and their families, and so having some sort of payment for that isn't a bad thing. Now, is it up to the open source project to provide that bug bounty, or is it the companies around it that are supported by it that would offer that bounty? I think that's kind of a better discussion there. But I'm not against bug bounties in the way that they allow for security researchers to really just hone their practice and help create a safer web. Yeah, and one of the things about the Drupal project for folks who are newer to it or who haven't been around it as much, the companies that are around Drupal really do support the project very well. And there's quite a broad base of companies that are out supporting the project in various ways, not just financially, through participation, through events, through allowing folks the time to come to these events, and so the ability for companies to step up and footing the cost of a bug bounty program, I think, is good. There are also, because of just the broadness of Drupal, there's quite a bit of there's a broadness of folks that are around and using it, especially in the government. And so there are some government initiatives and grants. I believe the EU still is running theirs that allows for folks to contribute to open source projects that are being used, and then use those for and then able to get some of that that money as well. There's a question about SecKit or Security Kit, and it does it implements a lot of the items that you would want to just kind of harden down a site through cross-site request forgeries and cross-site scripting, and SSL and forcing SSL and all that fun stuff. The question is, what are some of the vulnerabilities that it helps protect against? Yeah, they're all buzzwords, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to do a session like this, is to show XSS. Everyone sees XSS, and they don't know what that is. They don't see what cross-site scripting can actually do to somebody or do to their browser. And so, yeah, I mean, just running down that cross-site scripting is the top one. Cross-site request forgery. We didn't get into cross-site request forgery, but that is when I can trick you into clicking on a button or visiting a link or doing something from one site that will then affect another site with a request, but it's an authorized request. And a lot of the times this is done if I have, if I'm logged into one site and I have a session cookie for that site, I can either, and again, the browsers are getting really good at this. And so this is becoming harder and harder to do, but I can trick you into, like, one of the demos I set up for this in a WordPress demo that I do on the same style of demo is I trick the Empire into clicking a button to find out where is the rebel base. Right? Click here for the rebel base, kind of those BuzzFeedy clickbait words. And when they click on it, it actually sends them to a form that I found in my poorly written plugin that isn't checking for nonces and isn't checking for form hashes because I wasn't using them. And so there's no way to tell if that request came from a form that I, as the server, had put out, or it came from a form or just a post from another source. And so I can trick somebody into clicking on something and doing an action, an authenticated action somewhere else. So forging that request from a different site. Browsers are protecting against that really well now. And so does Drupal core. Has a lot of safeguards in place against that as well. And so, yeah, I mean, the other one that I haven't plugged yet is Guardr, Guardr. I'll put it here in the chat, and I will grab the link here real quick. But this is my friend Schropp. He is one of the maintainers of this. And basically, Guardr is a distribution of all of these security modules kind of baked into one. And so it does a lot of that core hardening for you, above and beyond what comes out of the box. So things like password policies, Watchdog, it extends the logs on Watchdog so you can see more things. Sometimes with Watchdog, if it's not capturing enough logs, I can flood you with a bunch of errors to kick out something that I've already done. Yeah, just various things like it'll warn you when a disk is about to fill up to prevent DDoS attacks, hide fatal errors, all sorts of stuff. And then the paranoia module for folks who are on Drupal 7. And I know there's still a larger contingent out there. For folks that are on Drupal 7, it blocks the PHP filter from being turned on, which, thank God, was removed from Drupal 8 and is still gone in Drupal 9. But that is definitely one of the larger holes that Drupal had in it, is that if I could get in as an admin or somehow escalate my privileges as an admin, I could then turn on the PHP filter and start wreaking all sorts of havoc across the site. And so, yeah, develop PHP is the same thing. A lot of sites will leave that turned on. And so same type of thing. Devel should never be turned on in production, but it also, the paranoia module helps keep all that at bay. Yeah, Devel is remote code execution as a service. I don't know if that's a SaaS type company that would take off too well, but yeah, so definitely check out Garter, check out SecKick. Those are good ways to kind of get those basic pieces in place. Some of the things that I don't necessarily agree with are the security through obscurity approaches. So the idea that I'm going to somehow hide that I'm from Drupal by not putting it in the meta. I don't know about those of you that have been around the project for a while, but when I go to a site and I want to see if it's from Drupal or not, I mean, the first place I look is the obviously in the head to see if it's got the meta generator there, but I can tell from the DOM structure if it's Drupal or not very quickly. I can see views, I can see paragraphs, blocks. You just start looking for some of the common terminology and the common DOM structure that Drupal outputs. So some of those security through obscurity, it'll make folks feel good that they're trying to clean that off and trying to make it not look like Drupal. But at the end of the day, it's still fairly easy to tell unless you're really overwriting things in the if you're really overwriting things in the template layer. It's pretty easy to find that something is still Drupal. And so yeah, it's similar to the changing where the user login is from, rather than /user/login to something completely different. While useful for keeping spam from folks trying to just kind of brute force their way in, Drupal already has brute force protections in it. It'll prevent folks from trying to, access it and see that it's Drupal because, again, of the pathway. And so some of that obscurity is good for what we call script kiddies, or the folks that are younger in their black hat ways. But the idea of trying to obscure your whole site away from being Drupal, I just don't think you can do it. And I don't think you can do it effectively. Yeah, Boris is saying he changes his change log with one from typo 3. Yep, that'll work. It'll definitely that's definitely one way to doing it for sure. You'll start getting different attacks against you, but they won't be core Drupal ones. All right, folks, I think I'm going to wrap it up unless there's any last questions or thoughts that you guys want to throw in the chat there. I'll go ahead and sign off, and I will hopefully see you guys, you folks all pretty soon in person, whether that's Barcelona, if we're able to get out there, or wherever it may be. I hope you and yours stay safe and healthy throughout this all, and look forward to seeing everyone again. So thank you for having me again, DrupalCon Global and the organizing team, for all the work you guys do.